Good morning and welcome to the Humour Theatre. My name is Greg Jones and I'll be your host for these 2 days. We have 6 presentations here today, 2 sessions in the morning before reconvening after lunch at 1:30 p.m. for another 4 presentations in the afternoon. Our first speaker today will be Yvonne Perkins speaking on When STEM Becomes STEAM Will Benefit. Yvonne enjoys demystifying technology for others. Now a professional writer, Yvonne uses her technical skills to explain technology simply and clearly. There'll be time for questions at the end of this presentation. Please enter any questions in the questions section in Venulus. Over to you, Yvonne.
Thank you very much, Greg, and welcome everybody. Good morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land that I am standing in Melbourne, and I want to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and I also offer my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be participating in this program. Today, I'll be speaking quite directly on the conference theme, community. I'll be drawing on my work experience moving from one professional community to another. I will talk about the benefits to communities from welcoming newcomers, from encouraging the mixing of people between communities, that requisite variety that Kathy Reid spoke of yesterday in her keynote. I'll talk about the rich space that's in between professional communities that we need to encourage people to explore. And along the way, I will share my professional journey because I'm one of those people who has gone from, rotated around various different professional communities. I ask with the question about why do we limit ourselves? And we all do it, every one of us. We are brought up in a society that obviously has structure, but unwittingly has introduced needless restrictions on ourselves. We live in a world of hyper-specialization and categorizations which start at a really young age, and that is through the operation of stereotypes of who we should be, who we can be. The use of those stereotypes stifles the potential in us and the communities of which we are part. I'm talking about professional silos a lot in this talk. Specialization is absolutely needed. We start work in a particular career. We do need to get particular skills to be of service, of helping others in our society, and also to earn a living. Many of us stay in that career, and that's fine. And I think of the people that built these silos. They built really good, sturdy silos in the 1920s. These silos have served the community very, very well. In the area, we absolutely need specialization. But also, we do need some people to be traversing the boundaries between these silos. Throughout this talk, I'll be talking a little bit about my personal professional journey. And just to give a bit of background, my father is an engineer, nothing particularly unusual about that. But while I was growing up, my mother did a science degree at university, and she did programming, coding in that degree. Fortran, Algol were words that I heard quite often in growing up. And then she started work as a programmer at the Elizabeth Computer Centre in Hobart and became a COBOL programmer, and COBOL is still out there lurking somewhere. Endangered species, we might need to explore the habitats of the environments, but it's still there. Specialization is great and has helped us greatly and will continue to do that, but we can do better. We can dream of something much more inspiring. This is a picture of some silos on the Silo Art Trail in northwest Victoria. This particular set of silos is in Sheep Hills in the Wimmera region of northwest Victoria. And look, honestly, this is not a region that I would travel to at all, but I was attracted to visit this area on a 40-degree day because of the art. Art lifts us, it inspires us, it moves us. It's that inspiration that keeps us going, that keeps humanity achieving a lot more. So what is the art that I talk of? Obviously, I'm talking about creativity and imagination that connects with the emotions. This can be through the senses, such as the visual and the oral. Art communicates deep truths in an imaginative, in an evocative way. It gets us thinking in a different way. Art connects with our emotions to engender a response in us. It moves us to actually do something, just like I did by actually driving to Sheep Hills, which didn't see the hills, didn't see the sheep, flat, sun-baked country, really, really hot. But the art had moved me to travel there. I've got a broad conception of arts that I'm going to be using in this talk. So obviously there's the immediate creative arts that we're all familiar with, you know, the painting, the music and all of that kind of stuff. Then there's another conception of the arts, and that is the arts that you might find in a university arts faculty. So it would include, you know, English literature, the pure arts, but it would also include things like anthropology, linguistics, history, things like that. But there is also a third conception of art, and that art can be explored. It's the art of. Albert Einstein actually touched on this. He said, imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. It is, strictly speaking, a real factor in scientific research. There is an abundance of the art of in technology. And Brian Kernahan, in his keynote presentation yesterday, referred to the importance of creative people for the emergence of Unix. We have got this kernel of creativity that is in all of us. What I'm interested in, what has interested me all my professional life, is exploring the space between silos, between the professional silos. And in this talk, I'll look particularly at that space between technology and arts. What lies in between? This is a really interesting movement that is happening right now. In his talk, Simon Loeffler from Acme referred to the CLIP model from OpenAI, from OpenAI, sorry. When the code was released, creativity and experimentation by people online changed the way that this AI was used. And some very interesting machine-generated art was created. Now, for a really good look at experts in this field, have a look at Rivers Have Wings on Twitter. What I did is I actually got into this, into the Big GAN model, and I actually inserted the topic of my talk and just let the AI generate some art. Now, I'm not talking about, is this particularly highfalutin art? Is it particularly worthy? But it's an interesting, it's exploring. And sometimes, like when we explore the creative things, it might end up in a dead end, but it might not. It might open up a whole world. The importance is exploring and opening the world of possibilities. And I rather like the way that this has configured my talk with a person isolated in their silo and another bunch of people in separate silos, and STEAM uniting both of them. Another example is text analysis in the field of English literature and history is actually becoming incredibly important, and using sophisticated models for that. And here is and this opens up new worlds into our understanding of literature. And this is something that I have personally explored with the meaning of the word secular. In this particular instance, this particular lab is looking at women writers from the pre-Victorian era. So that's before Queen Victoria came on the throne, so before the 1830s. And there's a corpus of the texts, and here I've explored the word respect and looked at respect. We don't often actually think of maybe deference or reverence with respect. It causes us to think about how meanings of words are different for different people. The next example I want to show you is, I think we've seen a great advance in storytelling online and exploring the possibilities. And I really like this example from Mitchell Whitelaw and Skye Wassons from Australia. And I've got the URLs here if you want to look them up later. This is an audiovisual story from the Nap Nap Swamp in New South Wales. And here is a soundscape visually represented that you can click on, and you can hear the sounds of the swamp at different times of the day and at different times of the year, depending on the water levels. There's also an explanation of the sounds that you're hearing. So this is exploring audio, the oral landscape, in a visual means online, and looking at how this landscape changes over the time of a year. People don't often think that historians are people who can code, but increasingly with our digitized world, we've got a lot of historical evidence, like on Trove, that is coded, that can be explored by code, that should be explored by code. We also have a lot of historical documents that are actually born in code, that are born electronically, that don't have a physical representation. Increasingly, it's going to be very important for historians to be equipped with coding skills and also telling the stories on websites. So now historians are doing a lot of telling stories on websites. I have to take my hat off to Tim Sherratt. He opened this world for so many of us in Australia through Glam Workbench, through his blog posts, through his Twitter, through his conferences. Programming historian, that's where I learnt Python. And I learnt to scrape websites, legally, of course. And it's a wealth of possibilities. By now, you're probably saying, yeah, I know that. Yes, I can think of other examples. I can think of lots of examples. And the question is art already in tech? I've got this example of a graphic novel by that wonderful Service Postman. But we can also think of user interface design, marketing, storytelling through online games, and at linux.conf.au. I love this visual storytelling of the keynote speeches. So arts, as I was developing this talk, I realized that arts really are already an integral part of the technology world. But are we limiting ourselves by not properly recognizing that arts already are a part of the technology world, should be a part, and are an integral part? What I'm talking about is also our adherence to this idea of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. No mention of the arts. And I have just mentioned several areas that are integral to the technology world. And I could add documentation as well. And documentation, obviously, through that graphic novel can be incredibly creative. And we can draw on the skills of people who are very skilled in arts. I'm talking about diversity of thought. Why do we want diversity? We're not seeking diversity in technology or in the building industry or in nursing or so many other fields. We're not seeking diversity because we just want to see a dress or hear a different accent, fewer or more wrinkles, or worse still, just so we can have a diverse face that we can shove in our marketing photos to show that how diverse we are. I want to pick up on Kathy Reed's talk yesterday about resilience. Diversity really does give us resilience. It gives us much better services, much better products. It makes us much more nimble. And I've got this picture of a garden quite deliberately here because of the diversity in this garden. you've got the diplodenias here. You've got rhododendrons in the background, maple here, cypress here in the foreground here, miniature cypress in the foreground. You've got a camellia here, some parsley. This garden has flowers all times of the year. So we don't have in this picture an abundance of flowers, but we have it all times of the year. This is a resilient garden. It actually supports a great ecosystem. There's always some food there for birds and for bees. If there's a plant disease that strikes out a particular plant, it won't wipe out the whole garden. And I think we can use this analogy in our working world as well. And just and in our industries, we actually do need to have diversity. And I get to the, job advertisements. There's an increasing hyper specialization that's creeping into our job advertisements and into our industries. The problem of hyper specialization, so I'm not complaining about specialization, but the hyper specialization of requiring 5 years experience with a particular job title in exactly the same industry. That is a kind of hyper specialization that completely knocks out any possibility of having this very productive working between people of different backgrounds of thought. We need diversity of thought. So moving on to desirable communities. What do we need? What makes a community desirable? So I'm indicating here that we want to have some ability to enter and to perhaps exit, that fluidity between communities. I just want to share some of my personal experiences. So I started off in accounting, encouraged by my parents, and that's where I learned COBOL programming. I had already done basic programming at school. I worked in the world of accounting. Then I moved into public information, which is also about sharing information, but rather than through numbers, I shared it through words. And then I entered this world of digital humanities and professional historians. And this is where Tim Sherritt's wonderful contribution with his unconferences, and his blogging has been so important for my professional development. But there's also so many hundreds on Twitter, on blogs that I've learned from the program historian. Stack Overflow, fantastic resource. The documentation, particularly the documentation of the Trove API, that opened my eyes to the world of APIs. That was my grounding in APIs. I also move in the world of professional historians, and there's some fantastic professional bodies. Professional Historians Australia and the Australian Historical Association put on great professional conferences, have the opportunity for face-to-face meetups and smaller conferences, tutorials, seminars. There's a huge amount on Twitter historians and AusHist hashtags on Twitter, and of course the blogging. And WordPress, shout out to Mitch Mengi of the Parramatta WordPress meetup group. That was my first foray into website development, and I just went to so many Sydney WordPress meetups. And shout out also, obviously, to Will Brown. Fantastic. I went to 3 meetups a month while I was learning skills, and that face-to-face was really important. But obviously there's blogs and articles by WordPress developers. There's Slack, which has been a fantastic forum. There's also, importantly, documentation, just like the Trove API documentation was important for my professional development. And Write the Docs, the conferences in Slack, and Linux, this conference. So all of these professional communities have been very welcoming of me entering as a newbie and enabling me to explore and to grow professionally into these communities. Fantastic communities. I'm very grateful to all of them. So some basic elements in my story about these particular professional communities. What are the basic elements that are really important to be a great community? I'd have to say documentation for a professional community. and I'm not talking about just written word. Documentation can also be videos, can also be those podcasts and online tutorials and all of that kind of stuff. Documentation is important because this removes the barrier of not understanding a particular community, not being able to work with a particular community, not having the skills. Regular face-to-face opportunities is also important. And this is like the networking thing and actually starting to become comfortable in a community and having people that you know, having friends. And friendship is actually important even in professional community. Regular face-to-face local opportunities are great, but also the national opportunities like this conference. It's really important. It is those between the sessions in the back halls that you really cement the feeling of I belong. And this I belong is really important if you want people to stay in your professional community. And then, of course, there's the online access, and that's absolutely essential today. Online access is incredibly important. Well, accessibility. Not everybody can come to the face-to-face meetups. They might not live close. They might have disabilities that prevent them. They might have family caring things that, prevent them. Online access is absolutely vital. So the three of them, I think, are vital. But we need more. Organisations, and this is, we're focusing on communities, but I realised as I was developing this talk, that there really is a very rich interplay between organisations, communities, and individuals. So while I'm not going to be talking a great deal about the organisations, but if you think about it, in every community, there is often a governing body, any community of a particular size. So it might be the committee of a club if it's a sporting club, and in our instance, obviously, there's Linux Australia, and the organisation help facilitate online and face-to-face spaces. Good organisations offer great documentation, and good organisations enforce clear codes of conduct fairly. Because if there are no codes of conduct, that unwittingly we can have barriers. We might not even be aware of it, or we might just be a bit lazy about it. So those codes of conduct are incredibly important. But also what's important are the individuals. And they're really important for making communities great. And as I said, I've given a shout out to several individuals that have made a particularly strong contribution, and there are many that I have not mentioned, to communities. But it's actually the little people like you and I, even as entering a community, is turning around and giving a hand up to the next person that's just a little bit behind, who is also just entering the community. And this is where I got into technical documentation, because I wanted to share with others how to use the Trove API. And the people who are using Trove, a lot of them don't know programming. So I did a series of blog posts about how to use the Trove API with Excel spreadsheets. Now, this is not because Excel is the superior resource for accessing an API. Of course, it's not. But this is because for so many people, this is the only tool that they know. And this, being able to use an API through Excel, is their first entry into the world of APIs. Now, they might just settle there and that's all they want to do. That's fine. But also I did this technical documentation as my own personal learning, because there's nothing, it is often said that if you're a learner sitting in the back of a room, you'll only learn 10% of what is said in that room. But if you're a teacher, you learn that the rest of the 90%, because you have to teach it. You're on the spot. And so I put that into practice. I wanted to learn how to use this API really well. Well, then I need to write about it, share, and be vulnerable and share it with others. And Tim Sherratt and others, helped me develop this series of tutorials. I also, having a look at the conference theme, and there was talk about the global aspect and how how important it is during this pandemic to keep those global connections. But I was thinking what is really missing, I think, in a lot of what we're talking about, and we're just starting to explore this through the pandemic, is micro communities and the importance of it. When we were put in lockdown, we suddenly realized how important our neighbors were, how important living with people in our households are. And sometimes that is very, very difficult, especially if it was not working terribly well to begin with. But the pandemic has really forced us to look at the local and the micro scale. And I think that we need to do more exploration of this, because I was thinking about the stresses that people are under that was so evidenced through the global forums that were on the various social media channels. I have a feeling that a lot of them stem back from, aside from the grieving process of how limited we are and what a terrible situation this was. The third element I was thinking was this issue of micro communities. We spend most of our waking hours in micro communities. These might be households, work teams, neighbours. And it made me think, I've just mentioned codes of conduct that organisations have for communities. Well, what's the code of conduct for our micro communities? Even in our micro communities, we need to be giving back. We need to be considering what others like. And it's harder in our micro communities. That's a place where we spend most of our time. That's a place where we particularly might be tired. And we just kind of let it all hang out. And it made me think of personal codes of conduct. And this is a question for each one of us. But I was thinking, I think it's actually important that we have a personal code of conduct. We focus on ourselves and what we can be doing better. And getting back to the codes of conduct, I have also seen in workplaces, lots of workplaces have value statements, codes of conduct, but there's a dissonance between the code of conduct and the value statement and what actually happens in that workplace. And there's a lot of parroting off and talking about it, but making sure each single person in that workplace looking at themselves and abiding by that code of conduct. And likewise, on the personal scale, we have a responsibility to other people around us to give and to help make things better. It made me think of, we quite often do a lot of finger pointing at others and nitpicking, and that's just exhausting. But what about doing the work on ourselves? And maybe that if we actually focus on ourselves, less nitpicking and fault finding on the micro, the little niggle kind of thing, and more focusing on, well, how am I making this situation better? Maybe that will make a great difference to how our communities work, and particularly the micro communities where our lives are grounded. Okay, so in conclusion, I have argued that actually I think we need STEAM, not STEM. We actually need to recognise the role of arts in technology and actually be really upfront about it. And it's not just an add-on, it's an integral part of technology. It's already part. And that leads us to thinking of, well, how are we paying the people that are providing this value added that is so important for our technology? We've already got it in there. Also, training of people. If we only train people in science, technology, engineering, and maths, and we devalue the training in all of the other aspects of life, including the arts, we're limiting the possibilities of our technology. I have also demonstrated that people from arts backgrounds are already skilling up and playing with technology. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I'm sure that you have already explored a lot of that. Once again, I think that there is a recognition that there is a lot of arts, there's a lot of creativity, and there's a lot of playing around, and technology is absolutely engaging with this. But I think this acknowledgement of the central part that arts and other disciplines have in this technology space is really important. So we limit our possibilities by not properly recognizing the importance of the arts in technology. When we have more diversity of thought in our teams, we all benefit. Now, that's not to say it's easy. And certainly initially, I mean, how many of us go, oh, wonderful, I've got somebody that comes from a completely different industry who's going to join my team, may not have the technical skills. There's work that's involved at the beginning, but that work will reap benefits. And that's where thinking about training, how much effort do we put in training, and each person being a trainer, taking that responsibility to guide others who do not know so much, rather than just being, oh gosh, I've got to deal with this person again with the same question, taking those few minutes to explain, the process, explain the lingo. Each individual in a community contributes personal qualities that makes that community welcoming and helps people to thrive. And I think this is what we need in our project teams, in our workplaces, as well as I can see there's a lot of work that Linux Australia and the participants in this conference have done to make the Linux world a welcoming space. Let's put that same work into our other communities. And I have talked about communities comprising sub-communities, sub-communities. The local and micro scale needs more attention from all of us. We need to break out of our silos. And I'll leave you with this thought. I just had to put that in there. STEAM, not STEM. And thank you very much for listening. I'll open up for questions now.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. It seems that the comments are in total agreement with your presentation, and we do indeed have one question. I'll just have to read that off a different screen. So here someone says, hi, I'm curious to know Yvonne's thoughts on how to encourage informal face-to-face discussion during pandemic-induced online-only events. I know that this is $1 million question, sorry.
Oh gosh, it is $1 million question, because certainly during this conference, and look, I'm so grateful for this opportunity to Linux Australia. This is my first experience of a Linux conference, and I have found it very difficult to actually follow those conversations while I'm concentrating on the presenters and learning about how this community works. Because I think when you're entering a community, there is a lot of listening that the entrants need to do. And I talked about personal qualities, and I think humility has to be one of them, and listening comes with humility. So I found that. So how to encourage those informal conversations? Look, honestly, Twitter I have found has been great for those kind of informal conversations. At the moment, unfortunately, people are a bit over the online. And this is where I'm hoping out of this to actually get some new connections and maybe explore them offline as well. I think in terms of the digital humanities and my experience there, because that was the first online community I entered, the hashtag was really important. And I think the welcoming nature and the conversational, so actually answering questions on Twitter and responding to people is really important. But that's not private, that's very public, unless you're doing it through DMs, of course. So, no, I haven't got the answer, but I think the motive behind the question is the right motive. And I think with the right motive and with creativity, we will actually be able to explore this and learn about this and understand this more. I think we're all learning about this at the moment. So I hope that answers it somewhat adequately.
Yes, okay. So there is another question just popped up now, so let's have a look at that. How do we derive the context of our symbolic interactions, which have now been objectified from the data and the metadata it comes with, to establish the true meaning of our interactions and not a misinterpretation? Is there a digital gap in society? How has this changed how we relate to one another?
Yeah. Look, I actually saw a question similar to that on Keynote Speak yesterday, and I did actually note that. I think that's a very interesting question to explore. Misinterpretations. And I think I'll just go back. Am I still screen sharing?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Yep, I'm still and so this is actually that question, and thank you very much for the questioner. If it, and particularly if it's the same person, I mean, really got me thinking last night about the micro communities, this issue of misinterpretation. And also thinking about the face-to-face. And my gut feeling, so I'm not a psychologist, so I'm just saying I've got a gut feeling. I think as human beings, we do need face-to-face, regular, daily face-to-face contact. And we also need friendships, deep friendships. And through those deep friendships, then we can iron out misunderstandings, and we can have reflected back a little bit about how the world sees us. So sometimes the misrepresentations come because we have not communicated very well, and we don't realise that. Sometimes the misrepresentations come from a really nitpicking attitude, and I think we've just got to stop the nitpicking. So I'm not talking about, pulling people up for really egregious behaviour. Absolutely. That's an issue of fairness, and we do need to, make sure that everybody's in a safe space and everybody's treated fairly. But there can become a real nitpicking that is unnecessary, that creates anxiety, and the kind of anxiety about being misrepresentation, and then you're watching what you're saying and you're going, oh my gosh, have I said that right? We've all got limited experiences and we're all on a learning journey, and I really think that we need to work on ourselves and stop nitpicking on others, but also have a sense of humility when somebody does pull you up. Now, I don't know, have I got the time? I've got a story actually to share about that. Have we got the time?
We are pretty much out of time
At
now.
the
It's
time.
11:31,
Yep.
So we need 10 minutes for a room changeover,
Okay.
and we can meet everyone here again at 11:40, I think it is.
Yeah. Look, I really appreciate those questions. They're very thought-provoking questions. And certainly this is not the end of the discussion about this. I think this is just an early exploration of it. So I'll be I'll be online and very interested in ideas that other people have to share about this topic.
Okay, thank you, Yvonne. That was a wonderful talk on a very important topic.